You're listening to The Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Never before could we really look at our children and say, you could be the next president.
The feeling most people get when they hear a Barack Obama speech, I felt this thrill going up my leg. I mean, I don't have that too often.
I felt like the bureaucracy of government had taken all of our hope away, and it feels like it's back.
Change gon' come. Oh, yes, it will.
Yes, we can.
Louder.
Yes, we can.
Louder.
Yes, we can.
Louder.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Speaking with the hubris and complete inversion of reality that has defined his entire political career, Obama ends his time in office exactly as he started it, lying through his teeth.
I am very proud of the fact that we will, knock on wood, lead this administration without significant scandal.
But this lie about a scandal-free presidency is especially galling because it encapsulates all of the lies of the past 8 years. In reality, as even a cursory examination of the record demonstrates, the administration of President Barack Obama has been nothing but 8 years of unrelenting lies and scandals. There were the big lies.
I taught the Constitution for 10 years. I believe in the Constitution, and I will obey the Constitution of the United States. We're not going to use signing statements as a way of doing an end run around Congress.
Well, that was candidate Obama then. This is President Obama now. He just issued a signing statement on Friday attaching it to the 2011 budget bill. In fact, he has issued nearly 20 such signing statements since taking office.
There were the bigger lies.
When there's a bill that ends up on my desk as president, you, the public, will have 5 days to look online and find out what's in it before I sign it, so that you know what your government's doing.
Speaker, in order to try to figure out what we're doing, how much damage to the country, I tried to get a copy of the bill. We have out here on the table 2454 that has 1,090 pages in it, but I've understood since debate in here that there's another 300 pages that were added in the middle of the night. My inquiry is, how do I get a copy of the other 300 pages that people here on the floor hadn't had a chance to read or see?
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it away from the fog of the controversy.
There were the brazen lies.
You can keep your plan if you are satisfied with it. If you like the plan you have, you can keep it. If you like your plan and you like your doctor, you won't have to do a thing. You keep your plan. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. If you've got health insurance, you can keep it.
But for the average person, many of folks who don't have health insurance initially, they're going to have to make some choices, and they might end up having to switch doctors.
The lies from his first months in office.
But if you are ready for change, then we can go ahead and tell the lobbyists their days of setting the agenda in Washington are over. They have not funded my campaign, they will not run my White House, and they will not drown out the voices of the American people when I'm president of the United States of America.
Just this weekend, the New York Times published a list of names, a rather long list of names of people who are working on Obama's transition team or who have accepted jobs in his White House, who are either former lobbyists or who have close ties to lobbyists.
The lies from his first day in office.
Let me say it as simply as I can. Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency. This is the most transparent administration in history.
Originally scheduled to be bestowed on the president in a publicly scheduled ceremony at the White House during Sunshine Week, that ceremony was canceled at the last moment, and the award, supposedly a token of praise for Obama's stated commitment to government openness, was itself bestowed on the president in a secret, off-the-record meeting to which the press was not invited.
One of the other things we discovered on this Sunshine Week, in addition to not only are they exempting themselves from FOIA requests, but the Obama administration sets even a new record for denying and censoring government files.
And the lies from before he was even in office.
President, could you please react to the reports of secret government surveillance of phones and internets? And can you also assure Americans that the government, your government, doesn't have some massive secret database of all their personal online information and activities?
Yeah. When I came into this office, I made two commitments that are more important than any commitment I make. Number one, to keep the American people safe. And number two, to uphold the Constitution. I will provide our intelligence and law enforcement agencies with the tools they need to track and take out the terrorists without undermining our Constitution and our freedom. The programs that have been discussed over the last couple of days in the press are secret in the sense that they're classified, but they're not secret in the sense that when it comes to telephone calls, every member of Congress has been briefed on this program. That means no more illegal wiretapping of American citizens. What the intelligence community is doing is looking at phone numbers and durations of calls. No more national security letters to spy on citizens who are not suspected of a crime. No more tracking citizens who do nothing more than protest a misguided war. What the intelligence community is doing is looking at phone numbers and durations of calls. No more ignoring the law when it is inconvenient, but by sifting through this so-called metadata, they may identify potential leads with respect to folks who might engage in terrorism.
But despite the endless litany of broken promises that Obama has left in his wake, his most striking betrayals of the public's trust weren't lies at all. Instead, the strange mass hysteria that surrounded his ascent to the Oval Office, that hope and change delirium that swept up untold millions, caused others to project their ideas and ideals onto him. Suddenly he was being anointed as a man of peace before making a single, substantive action.
God morgen, good morning. Den norske Nobelkomité har bestemt at Nobels fredspris for 2009 skal tildeles president Barack Obama for hans ekstraordinære innsats for å styrke internasjonalt diplomati og mellomfolkelig samarbeid. The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided that the Nobel Peace Prize for 2009 is to be awarded to President Barack Obama for his extraordinary efforts to strengthen international diplomacy and cooperation between peoples.
As farcical as that announcement seemed at the time, how much more galling does it seem now, after Peace Prize Obama has gone down in the history books as the first and only president in U.S. history to be at war every single day of his 8-year administration. Indeed, for people around the world, Obama will be defined by the wars of imperial aggression that he waged across 7 different theaters during his time in office. There was the war in Afghanistan, now the longest ever military engagement in the history of the United States. October 7th, 2016 marks the 15th anniversary of the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan by US-led NATO forces. 15 years since the bombs began raining down on the country. 15 years of drone strikes and civilian massacres, detainees and prison torture, insurgency and bombings, warlords and drug lords and CIA kickbacks. 15 years of death, 15 years of destruction. And still, like a decades-long nightmare, it continues.
I'm announcing an additional adjustment to our posture. Instead of going down to 5,500 troops by the end of this year, the United States will maintain approximately 8,400 troops in Afghanistan into next year through the end of my administration. The narrow missions assigned to our forces will not change. They remain focused on supporting Afghan forces and going after terrorists. But maintaining our forces at this specific level, based on our assessment of the security conditions and the strength of Afghan forces, will allow us to continue to provide tailored support to help Afghan forces continue to improve.
The war against Libya, undertaken without even congressional approval and waged under false pretenses.
Fox News has revealed today that a bipartisan group of lawmakers headed by Representatives Dennis Kucinich and Walter Jones will be filing a federal lawsuit against the Obama administration addressing the constitutional and legal justifications for military action in Libya. The announcement comes a day after the release of House Speaker John Boehner's publicized warning to the president in the form of a letter urging Mr. Obama to provide an explanation for the continued engagement in the region and refusal to acknowledge the congressional role in military operations.
We are staring not only into the maelstrom of war in Libya, the code of behavior we are establishing sets a precedent for the potential of ever more violent conflicts in Syria, Iran, and the specter of the horrifying chaos of generalized war throughout the Middle East. Our continued occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan makes us more vulnerable, not less vulnerable, to being engulfed in this generalized war.
The Libyan opposition and the Arab League appealed to the world to save lives in Libya. And so at my direction, America led an effort with our allies at the United Nations Security Council to pass a historic resolution that authorized a no-fly zone to stop the regime's attacks from the air and further authorized all necessary measures to protect the Libyan people.
If this compassion for the plight of men and women in Libya was so heartfelt, why is it that you have heard nothing whatsoever about Libya in the last 2 years from the same politicians and talking heads who persuaded you that dropping bombs on the country was the only way to save it? Is it because the situation was resolved with the death of Gaddafi, and the virtuous Western-backed freedom fighters have established a happy, prosperous, functioning society of peace and happiness? Of course not.
Libya is on the way to becoming a terrorist outpost for possible future attacks on Europe. The prospect has been raised by Libya's former prime minister who came to power following the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime. He recently fled the country, where rival militias run rampant and are in de facto control of the state.
Well, the thing is, the way R2P was manipulated to legitimize the invasion, bombing, and fragmentation of Libya, because this is what's happening nowadays. Look at what Libya is post-NATO intervention. It's a totally failed state run by militias. And nobody cares about what's going on in Libya. Proof number one, it disappeared from the news cycle completely. Proof number two, what only matters to the so-called international community, which, as we know, is comprised of US, Britain, France, Tel Aviv, and the Persian Gulf monarchies, and nobody else, maybe Turkey sometimes, no? Or Japan or South Korea. This is the international community. The only thing that mattered for them was the oil, gas, and further on, the water, of course. This is in terms of the three major French water companies. And nobody cares what's going to happen to Libya. Libya is going to be mired in civil war for years and probably decades from now on. But nobody cares.
The war in Pakistan, waged with drone strikes on civilians.
A United Nations team says more than 400 civilians have fallen victim to U.S. military drone strikes against Islamic militants. Members of the team urged U.S. leaders to release data on casualties in the interest of transparency. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights asked the team to compile a report on the U.S. drone program in countries including Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Yemen. UN Special Rapporteur Ben Emerson says at least 400 civilians have been killed in Pakistan since 2004.
Anger on the streets of Pakistan against the U.S. drone campaign.
Human rights activists and representatives from religious parties have demonstrated in Pakistani cities, including the capital Islamabad, to condemn what they see as the violation of their country's sovereignty. Numerous protests have been held in the past since the US began its drone strikes in Pakistan in 2004 under its so-called war on terror. Pakistanis are also angry at the US drone campaign over civilian casualties that they have caused. Demonstrators say that the attacks by the unmanned aircraft must end in Pakistan and that the mere condemnation by the government is not enough.
We want our government to take action to stop the violation of our country's sovereignty, because it was the government that allowed the US to launch its drone strikes. Authorities should inform us about the steps needed to stop these attacks.
The Jonas brothers are here. They're out there somewhere. Sasha and Malia are huge fans, but boys don't get any ideas. I have 2 words for you: predator drones. You will never see it coming. You think I'm joking?
The war against Syria, a war waged in conjunction with the ongoing war in Iraq and fought via al-Qaeda-linked proxy forces and an Islamic State militia trained by American forces.
There is a great irony here in the sense that if you wanted to believe in an expansive definition of the 2001 use of authorization of force, it says go after al-Qaeda and associated forces. Well, al-Qaeda and associated forces are opposing Assad. So if you want to believe in an expansive definition of the 2001 AUMF, you might believe that you could actually support Assad with arms, that the original use of authorization of force actually would justify giving arms to Assad. And I'm not proposing that. But I am proposing that you will be giving arms to the side that is fighting against Assad that has elements of al-Qaeda.
So if al-Qaeda is our sworn enemy, why is the United States supporting al-Qaeda fighters as part of the Syrian opposition, just as we did al-Qaeda fighters in the Libyan uprising? Well, that was the question I posed to President Obama during my one-on-one interview with him.
You mentioned about al-Qaeda during your speech, going after al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, certainly going after them in Yemen as well. Yeah. And yet there's some concern about the U.S. funding the Syrian opposition when there are a lot of reports that al-Qaeda is kind of heading up that opposition. How do you justify the two?
Well, I share that concern, and so what we've done is to say we will provide non-lethal assistance to Syrian opposition leadership that are committed to a political transition, committed to an observance of human rights.
Well, in the video, the commander, he goes by the name of Abu Sakar. He has found a man, a soldier from the Syrian army, dead by bullet, I've been told. And he took a knife and he cut out a hole in the chest and pulled out the lungs and the hearts. And while being videotaped, he held up the lung and said, "You dogs of Bashar, this is how we will treat you. I'll eat your hearts and your livers." And he took a bite in the video, and it was meant as a message to the regime.
Syria, we backed, I believe, in some cases, some of the wrong people, and not in the right part of the Free Syrian Army. And that's a little confusing to people. So I've always maintained, and go back quite some time, that we were backing the wrong types. I think it's going to turn out maybe this weekend in a new special that Brett Baer is going to have Friday that's going to show some of those weapons from Benghazi ended up in the hands of ISIS. So we helped build ISIS. Now there's a danger there, and I'm with you.
Several weeks ago, former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency Michael Flynn made waves in the media when he told Al Jazeera the Obama administration turned a blind eye to warnings that the self-proclaimed Islamic State was on the rise. Speaking about a declassified DIA memo which predicted the Islamic State's rise as a result of the West's policy of backing Syrian rebels, Flynn told Jazeera's Mehdi Hassan the administration ignored his analysis, saying, "I think it was a decision. I think it was a willful decision."
WikiLeaks released audio from a September 22nd meeting in which John Kerry admitted to allowing the growth of ISIS.
The reason Russia came in is because ISIL was getting stronger. Daesh was threatening the possibility of going to Damascus and so forth. And that's why Russia came in. because they didn't want a Daesh government, and they supported Assad. And we know that this was growing. We were watching. We saw that Daesh was growing in strength, and we thought Assad was threatened. We thought, however, we could probably manage, that Assad might then negotiate. Instead of negotiating, you got Assad. Now you got Putin to support him.
The war in Somalia, a military action justified by the president in a move that is as utterly ridiculous as it is insulting to the intelligence as self-defense.
September the 11th, 2001, the world changed when members of al-Qaeda hijacked passenger planes, slamming them into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a field in Pennsylvania. Now, a few days later, the US Congress passed a sweeping new law called the Authorization for Use of Military Force, the AUMF. It provides the president with broad authority to, quote, use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September the 11th, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States. Now, it's important for you to hear the actual language of that law because it shows just how you can justify certain US military and intelligence activities around the world if there's a connection somehow with al-Qaeda. Now to Somalia. We know the US has recently increased its on-the-ground military activity against al-Shabaab forces in support of Somali and African Union forces. But up until now, those activities have mostly been justified as being in self-defense. Some analysts have pointed out that it's now a pretty thin legal justification, given that the US appears to be actively involved in battlefield situations. So now, the New York Times, citing unnamed US officials, says that as part of the president's regular letter to Congress listing updates to current US military operations abroad, he will include al-Shabaab as part of the groups defined under the AUMF law. If that happens, it will provide US forces soon to be under a Trump administration more power to actively pursue al-Shabaab using, quote, all necessary and appropriate force.
And the war in Yemen, yet another military involvement that the average American doesn't even know about, let alone understand the reasoning for, and that has inevitably embroiled the American military in yet more war crimes.
At least 13 people were killed in a U.S. drone strike in Yemen. There was a convoy of vehicles traveling in Rada, which is the capital of Baida province, and where were they going? A wedding. There was a group of vehicles that was driving to a wedding. The U.S. thought that it was al-Qaeda, but it was a party. The strike, quote, left charred bodies and burnt out cars on the road.
Documents obtained by Reuters show the U.S. government's concerned it could be implicated in potential war crimes in Yemen because of its support for a Saudi-led coalition air campaign. The Obama administration's continued to authorize weapons sales to Saudi Arabia despite warnings last year from government lawyers that it might be considered a co-belligerent under international law. This comes as a Saudi airstrike on a funeral home in the capital Sana'a on Saturday, killed at least 140 mourners and wounded more than 500 others. Survivors spoke of back-to-back bombings during a funeral service for the father of an official with the rebel Houthi government, which controls Sana'a.
This is a heinous crime one can barely imagine. No one ever thought they would strike a mourning hall. Can anyone imagine hitting people mourning to death? The battle is taking place on the borders and several other places, yet they bomb a hall. And now they deny it was their missiles. We are all here. Our homes are nearby. We heard the missiles and the planes. There were 2 planes and 4 airstrikes, not just 2.
Thousands of Yemenis gathered at the United Nations building in Sana'a on Sunday, calling for an international investigation into the assault. The attack was carried out with warplanes and munitions sold to the Saudi-led coalition by the United States. The U.S. Air Force continues to provide mid-air refueling to Saudi warplanes.
At home, meanwhile, Obama will be known for aggressively expanding the militarized police state that Bush brought in after the false flag events of September 11th, 2001.
Well, that's not who we're supposed to be, but that's exactly who Barack Obama is. That's who he is. Change who's look, people sometimes say, oh, no, he never promised not to spy in on you. Yes, he did. He promised it right there in the 2008 campaign. So this is supposed to be a big faux pas and oh, no, don't do it. He lied. It's not subtle. He said there will be no spying on citizens who are not suspected of a crime. He lied. There is spying on all of us, and we are not suspected of a crime. Barack Obama is a liar. Can I make it clear? That's a big thing to say. Oh, my God, wow. He just called a politician a liar. Yes, Obama is a politician. He's Big Brother, and he's a liar.
Wow, Obama seems like he's really against this wiretapping thing, huh? Man, when he gets into office, he's gonna fix it. Yeah, it's going to be a bright new day for America once we get Bush out and put Obama in. He sounds like he's just as pissed off about this illegal wiretapping as we are. Well, guess what? We voted him in twice, and he didn't do jack about the illegal wiretapping. Oh, I'm sorry, he did do something about it. He expanded it.
Each year, the United States Department of Defense's budget and expenditures are approved by Congress, which must pass a National Defense Authorization Act in order to fund the DoD. The most recent bill, however, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012, shocked many by containing an extraordinary provision allowing for the indefinite detention without trial of anyone even suspected of providing support to individuals or groups identified as terrorists. Although this represents little change from the US government's modus operandi in waging the so-called global war on terror, many were amazed to discover that this provision specifically applies to American citizens who can now be detained by American military personnel anywhere in the world, including on US soil, and held indefinitely without trial. Perhaps it is not surprising that President Obama chose New Year's Eve as the date to sign the NDAA, as the revelry of the holiday predictably distracted Americans from the event. Particularly remarkable is the fact that this legislation has been almost universally identified as an overt act of tyranny by commentators of all political stripes, perhaps most importantly from sources that have traditionally defended the actions of Obama and his administration.
The ACLU said that Mr. Obama's decision to sign the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, including the controversial detainee provisions, would tarnish his presidency. Quote, President Obama's action is a blight on his legacy because he will forever be known as the president who signed indefinite detention without charge or trial into law.
I will choose in my administration not to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens, meaning another administration can choose to do so, meaning that the bill says, yes, the president has the authority and the option of detaining U.S. citizens without a trial indefinitely. This is definitive. And it's not just my interpretation. It's not just Glenn Greenwald's interpretation. As we told you yesterday, the team of lawyers at the ACLU, whose job it is to protect our civil liberties, says that is definitely the correct interpretation, and it is hideous. Now today, more people piling on.
My understanding is that when Carl Levin thought, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, thought in the Senate that the provision for it being applicable to American citizens on American soil was stripped out, the White House had it put back in, which is just dumber than mud. I can't understand how we'd want to go back to Reconstruction days. I mean, that's the last time we destroyed posse comitatus.
But this is the White House that thinks that it's okay to assassinate U.S. citizens abroad without due process in the case of Anwar al-Awlaki. So why wouldn't they want that in? Because this is codifying powers that they've already determined they have.
It's very true.
On Tuesday, the New York Times published a major expose about how President Obama personally oversees a, quote, secret kill list containing the names and photos of individuals targeted for assassination in the U.S. drone war. According to the Times, Obama signs off on every targeted killing in Yemen and Somalia and the more complex or risky strikes in Pakistan. Individuals on the list include U.S. citizens as well as teenage girls as young as 17 years old. Glenn, can you comment on that?
Well, we've, of course, known for a long time that the President of the United States believes that he has the power to order people killed, assassinated, in total secrecy, without any due process, without transparency or oversight of any kind. I really do believe it's literally the most radical power that a government and a president can seize, and yet the Obama administration has seized this power and exercised it aggressively with very little controversy.
Surveying the flaming wreckage of the last 8 years, Obama's duped supporters will now be the first to tell you that you can't blame everything that happens on the president. The same people who voted Obama into office in the earnest belief that he would change the system now solemnly intone that he was just one man up against an entire system. But if a leader is defined by those they appoint, Obama failed with flying colors there too. Just look at the warmongers and criminals that he and his financial and corporate string pullers stuffed into his administration.
When I first started assembling this administration, I knew we were about to face some of the most difficult years this country has seen in generations. The challenges were big, and the margin for error was small. 2 wars, an economy on the brinks of collapse, and a set of tough choices about issues that we had put off for decades. Choices about health care and energy and education, how to rebuild a middle class that had been struggling for far too long. And I knew that I needed somebody at my side who I could count on day and night to help get the job done. In my mind, there was no candidate for the job of chief of staff who would meet the bill as well as Rahm Emanuel.